Hey, hi, hello. Welcome to Diana Emerson today. We are listening to the Brentwood 5 Massacre.
Good evening, I'm Anthony Robart. This is Crime Beat, the stories behind some of Canada's most high-profile homicides, told by the reporters who walk the beat every day, and the families demanding answers. Tonight, it was a mass killing that shocked the nation.
This one I'll never forget. I mean, these kids were good kids.
The worst sound ever. He was on the other end of the phone and all I heard was no. I truly, like, truly hope that guy got in.
And now, crime reporter Nancy Hicks brings us the story of the Brentwood 5 massacre.
In a city where it feels like it's winter most of the year, people celebrate even the slightest warm spell. It's not unusual to see people out on patios wearing shorts in Calgary in April. Shorts are also part of a year-end tradition at the University of Calgary called Bermuda Shorts Day. It's a year-end party, and there's always a big event at the university, and the celebrations often spill off campus. On April 14th, 2014, a group of friends planned one of those parties at their home near the university campus in the northwest Calgary neighborhood of Brentwood. The small gray and blue split-level house was a well-known rental for university students that many affectionately called the Butler Mansion because it was located on a quiet block on Butler Crescent. This wasn't a big party, and many of those invited went to junior high or high school together. The rest knew each other from university. For the most part, the mood was laid back and relaxed. No one could have predicted how dark things would get and how quickly it all unraveled. All of the Calgary Police Service has been deeply impacted by today's tragedy, but so many people have questions, and so the chief was quick to try to come out and shed some light on what happened.
This is the worst mass murder in Calgary's history. We have never seen 5 people killed by an individual at one scene. So the scene was horrific. The suspect arrived at the party, obtained a large knife, and targeted the victims one by one, stabbing them several times. When our officers arrived, 3 young men were discovered deceased in the home. An injured female was also found inside the home and taken to the hospital in critical condition, suffering from stab wounds. Another male, also suffering from stab wounds, was discovered on the front lawn and transported to the hospital in critical conditions. They both succumbed to their injuries.
The 5 young people killed in this massacre were Lawrence Hong, Katie Paris, Jordan Segura, Zachariah Rathwell, and Josh Hunter. They are now lovingly remembered as the Brentwood 5. Lawrence Hong was the oldest among this group, and the firstborn son of Lorenzo and Marlene Hong.
He's a very social person. He would greet everybody, strangers. He doesn't choose.
Lawrence was 7 when his parents and younger brother Miles moved to Canada from the Philippines. He had a special shyness about him and preferred to be behind the camera than in front of it.
Hi, Lawrence. How are you?
Hi, I'm good.
Are you good? Do you like having your picture taken?
Are you sure it's the picture, not a video?
No, it's only one picture. Oh, you're gonna mess up the shot.
He was studying urban design and infrastructure and dreamed of creating a more innovative future. He also worked part-time with his mother as a sales assistant for a local home builder.
That was, I guess, the most enjoyable time that I had with him as a grown-up man. And I was able to see that he had applied what he had studied.
Lawrence's younger brother went to high school with Katie Paris. She She was born on February 5th, 1991, to Greg Paris and Shannon Miller. She had an older sister and a younger brother. Later, her father remarried, and soon after, Greg and Cam Laraway had a little girl.
Our daughter, her little sister, just idolized her, and when she'd come over, like, she literally would pet her hair.
From a very young age, Katie's mom remembers she was strong-willed, feisty.
Mostly she was stubborn, which that was a love-hate thing I had for her because I really admired actually her tenacity and standing up for what she believed in, even as like little.
Katie found her true calling when she was introduced to dance.
It was always great to watch her dance because she was so passionate, and her face lit up when she danced. You could tell that was her passion.
How exciting was it for you as a mom seeing her just like find that thing?
Was everything. Yeah. She struggled a lot. Sorry. Yeah, she struggled a lot to figure out what she wanted to do. When she decided on that, she just lit up, like from inside. So her eyes were glowing again. She had this confidence that I hadn't seen for a really long time.
Katie knew Jordan Segura from high school. They shared a circle of friends. He was raised by Patty Segura, a single mother. He also had a brother who was only 17 months older than him.
I can tell you they were each other's first friends. You know, Jordan followed Julian around. Even before he could move and crawl, he was watching every move Julian made.
Patty and her boys were like the three musketeers, all for one and one for all.
We did pretty much everything together. The kids started skiing and snowboarding when they were quite young. I think they were probably about 7, 8 years old. Kids would snowboard and I would ski, and they were much better than me.
In university, Jordan was taking history and religious studies and ended up interviewing a funeral director for a research paper. He made such a good impression, the funeral home offered him a job.
He just fit in so well. He was like the host. He was a limo driver for the families. He spent time with families, just waiting for them if their family member was buried at a cemetery. You know, the funeral would be over, everybody would leave, and if the family, the mom and dad wanted to stay, he would just wait. He was
Jordan wanted to be a humanitarian.
He was going to be a consultant for businesses and the government that have officials that travel to other countries around the world. And he was going to explain to them about the other cultures in these countries that they were going to so that they wouldn't offend the people.
Josh Hunter was one of Jordan's friends from high school. He loved spending time with his parents and his little sister, and was well known for his giant hugs.
Tender soul, great kid.
It became clear very early on Josh was born to be a musician.
We got him into music very early. He was 10 when he started playing drums. He's very passionate about that, connected with music in a big way, and that was a big part of his journey. And
even from the get-go, he was the kind of kid that you weren't going, wow, God, I wish he could do it.
Yeah.
So it wasn't, you weren't just hearing a bunch of smash and bash, and he was actually, he had rhythm.
We had a room where, the music room where it was set up, and so he worked at it, and he was involved in music at school, and started a band, and, it was just a big part of his life. So.
He was in grade 11.
Yeah.
And we started Zachariah and the Prophets and Zach, and Barry were in grade 10.
Zachariah Rathwell was one of Josh's closest friends and part of the band. They all felt he had the coolest name, so they became Zachariah and the Prophets. His name was carefully carefully chosen by his parents, Bruce and Rhonda Lee Rathwell.
Zachariah. Hi. I liked Zachariah, and I liked the sound of it and the flow of it, and I liked the shortened version, Zach. So, but I didn't like Zach, so that's why he's Zackariah. And we used to joke that he was going to be 20 before he knew how to spell his name. I have a footstool that has his name carved into it in blocks. It's like a puzzle, and he used to, that was, you know, stand on it to brush his teeth and things like that. That was how he learned to spell his name, because he thought twice a day it was always there.
From a very early age, it became clear Zach was gifted with a wildly creative mind and a passion for music.
He was in, let's say, grade 7, and he wanted a guitar, and he wanted guitar lessons. And I mean, anybody that has kids knows that they go through these sort of phases. And do you really want to do that? Is that something you really want to do? Like, am I going to go out and spend $200 on something and it's going to get thrown in the closet? Nope, I want to play guitar. And by that time, Bruce and I were divorced, and so there wasn't a lot of extra money. And I had a girlfriend whose daughter had done exactly that. Oh, I want to play guitar. And they had bought her a guitar and an amp, and it was now sitting in the back of the closet. And so she sold it to me for really cheap, and that was Zach's first guitar, and he never stopped playing.
Zach spent hours and hours practicing in the basement. The sound of him strumming would waft upstairs and bring a special calm to his mother. His progress was remarkable, his talent undeniable. He also had a very original voice, so he took on the role of lead vocals. Zachariah and the Prophets wasn't just a group messing around. The four friends were talented musicians who were making waves in Calgary. On April 12, 2014, just 2 days before the Bermuda Short Stay party, the band celebrated a major milestone, the release of their first EP.
We were at Palomino, sold out after at least 82. We were on the chair grooving. The band was in, great form, doing a great show.
The group of friends was looking forward to catching up at the Bermuda Short Stay party. But the night would take a horrific turn.
Coming up on Crime Beat. Police were now investigating the worst mass killing in Calgary's history. The parents of the Brentwood Five had no idea their world was about to be shattered. The date, April 15th, 2014, would become one of horror and tragedy. We now return to Nancy Hicks with the Brentwood Five Massacre.
Police were called to the home at about 1:20 Tuesday morning. When officers arrived, 4 men and 1 woman had been stabbed. 2 of those victims were taken to hospital but died soon after. Witnesses helped officers find 22-year-old Matthew DeGrood a short distance away.
There was a struggle, and he had to be subdued.
Calgary Police Homicide Detective Matt Demarino became the primary investigator assigned to the case.
I will never forget that moment till the day I die. I was in bed and asleep. Took the call at about 2 o'clock in the morning, and my boss told me, we have 3 people dead, we have 2 more who are about to die, and we have the offender in custody. We deal with homicides of all nature, and this one I'll never forget. I mean, these kids were good kids, and they were young, and they were in university, and they have whole lives ahead of them.
The last time we saw Jordan was at home. Julia was working in the garage and I was in the kitchen. And Jordan wanted to borrow the gardening equipment so he could clean up the yard at Butler. And so he loaded up the little trailer and he was leaving. Like, I was in the kitchen. He walked past behind me and said, "Bye, Mom." And I said, "Make sure you lock up that garden equipment because somebody's going to steal it." And he walked through the garage, said goodbye to Julian, and left. And that was Sunday evening. And then on Monday evening, I sent him a quick text, and about 8, and I knew there was gonna be a party at Butler, and I attached a picture of our dog to the text, and I said, "Are you partying, Jordan?" And he replied, "Yes, Max." So that was the last text, and that was the last time we saw Jordan.
Katie didn't make it to the EP release, but she planned to catch up with her friends at Jordan's party the following Monday.
She didn't go out very much. She was definitely a homebody. And that was one of the reasons why she called. She was telling me that she was going to go to this party. And it was with all her friends that she grew up with and went to school with. It wasn't some crazy university party that, anybody and everybody was showing up to. It was just a really great group of kids.
Lawrence Hong had been burning the midnight oil trying to finish his last term paper.
We're just inside the house. We'll send Netflix. That, could you make me coffee? So I go down and make him coffee. Right. For 2 nights, I definitely will never forget that night. The machine was running overtime. Right, the espresso machine was brewing everything. I never saw our machine works continuously. So he wasn't sleeping for basically 48 hours to finish his term paper.
By Monday morning, he was finally done, but he was exhausted, and he didn't think it was safe to drive being so sleep deprived. His mom and dad drove him to class. When they finally arrived, Lawrence had to run to get to class on time.
When Marlene moved from the back to the front seat, I said, my dad has passed away then. I said to Marlene, Papa would be very proud of Lawrence. Didn't know the significance. Because he would be very proud of what he had become.
That day, the Bermuda Short Stay parties were underway at the university. Josh shared a video of the festivities on his social media with the caption, "Crazy Town BSB."
He parked there in the morning and rode his bike to school, went to Bermuda Short Stay.
Zach was taking classes at the Alberta University of the Arts. After school, he went home and told his mom he planned to meet up with Josh and the rest of their friends in Brentwood.
I specifically remember standing by the stove with him and him telling me what he was doing that night, and that he only had a couple more classes left before he was done, and that he was planning on drinking, and he was gonna ride his bike. He wasn't gonna drive, but he was gonna stay over there, and then he would just ride his bike to ACAT in the morning because it was close. And I just told him I loved him, and he said he loved me, and I gave him a kiss. I had to stand on my tippy toes to give him a kiss. And he helped me carry the stuff out to the car, and I drove off. And that was the last time I saw him.
The party was pretty chill, just a relaxed get-together, nothing crazy or out of hand. A few people hung around the fire pit in the backyard, others inside the house. There was one guy who stood out. He was 22 years old and was invited by Brendan, one of the roommates of the Brentwood house. They were childhood friends. He arrived late to the party, and his conversation seemed ominous, going on and on about conspiracy theories. He started talking about the blood moon. the apocalypse, and vampires.
Most of the people at the party didn't think much of the young man's ramblings, but his behavior got more and more strange. That's coming up on Crime Beat. As details of this tragedy were revealed, the parents of the victims still needed to be notified their loved ones were gone. We now return to Nancy Hicks with the Brentwood 5 Massacre.
Lorenzo and Marlene Hong didn't hear from their son after the party, and that was out of character.
Lorenzo keep on saying, like, it's weird, he's not texting.
He's not answering
yeah,
the
and
phone.
yes, Lorenzo called and he's not answering. So Lorenzo said, it's weird. But then the thing is, we don't know where he is.
Lorenzo couldn't sleep. He kept watching his phone, waiting for word from Lawrence. Instead, the next morning, there was a knock on the door. It was police.
He show us a picture.
Yes, if that's Lawrence's clothes. And I said, yes. And I said, then where's Lawrence? And then they said, oh, he's into...
there was an incident.
There's an incident. So I said, is he in trouble? Did he did something wrong? And he says, no, it's the other way around.
Lorenzo knew what the officers were trying to say. He hugged his wife.
And Lorenzo said, he's already dead, Mom. He's not. I said, why? What happened? Like, why, Lawrence? He's a good boy.
Across town, at Greg Paris's home, April 15th started like any other day. His wife, Cam Laraway, woke up and turned on her TV.
All it said was 5 people were killed at a house party. And I remember thinking, oh, that's terrible. What a horrible thing. And this car pulled out. And I knew when they got out that they were not parents from the school, that it was 2 plainclothes policemen. And he looks and he goes, Shannon? And I went, no. And then he looked kind of confused. They looked at each other. And I went, well, that's my husband's ex-wife's name. Who are you looking for? So I don't know exactly what they said. You know, they said his name. I remember the one officer saying, the old typical, we regret to inform you. And that's all I heard. And then Caitlin Paris, and then homicide. And I'm like, what? No.
Cam said she had to take a few minutes to try and calm down. And then she called Greg to tell him police were at the house.
I just started feeling dread right away. And of course, I opened the door and there's these 2 guys. I think they had suits on. I don't know. And they started doing the same thing. And all I heard was homicide and party. And I didn't know she was at a party. And then they finally said her name, and I just took a couple steps and fell on the floor. I didn't pass out. I just couldn't walk. I couldn't stand up. And I couldn't figure this out because she didn't go to parties. And it was a Monday. I'm going, this is no. And then they said there's 4 more. And then I'm like, what? Like what? Like now you're like, how did 5 people get killed?
I was driving to work that morning on April 15th, and I heard it on the radio. They didn't say names, but as soon as I heard it on the radio, I knew it was Katie. I have no idea how I knew. So I managed to get to work, and then I told myself, I was being crazy, that I would just wait till 8:30 because Katie would be mad if I woke her up. So I got to my desk and I just sat there. I didn't work. I didn't do anything. And 8:30 never came because at 8:21 is when Greg called me. And as soon as I saw that it was him, I just knew that what I thought or felt was true. And he wouldn't tell me on the phone, but I knew. Honestly, I can't think of anything that's the same. I truly believe I died that day.
Patty Segura wasn't concerned about her son Jordan throwing a party. It was a small get-together with a great group of kids.
The next morning, these two plainclothes police officers got out of this plain car that was parked in front of my house. And they asked me my name. Or no, they asked me, they said my legal name. I have a other name it's not Patty. I have a full name, full legal name. They asked me that. And right away, the panic went up. And I started to shake, and they told me to sit down, and I yelled out for Julian to come because he was getting ready for work. So we sat down in the kitchen, and the police officer looked right at me, and he said, Jordan passed away last night. So I don't remember much after that. I remember looking to my right to Julian and saying, call Daddy. And then Julian called a couple of other people after he called his dad. So
Patty turned on the news to learn more about what happened to her son.
Nobody would tell me anything. Anybody that came to the house, nobody would tell me what happened to Jordan. I knew he passed away, but I didn't know how.
So how did you find that out?
I went upstairs and went on my phone, and I heard the chief of police explaining it in probably a press conference or something. I don't know. That's the only way I knew how Jordan died.
Josh Hunter's father went out of town on business right after the EP release for Zachariah and the Prophets.
I went out of town the next day on a business trip to Vancouver, and then I was up really early for some reason looking at the news, and I saw this news flash about this thing that had happened, and I had no idea. And I'm going, oh, that's horrific. I can't even imagine.
Well, I was up because my mom and my brother were in town for the CD release, and they were leaving that morning, and they were planning on being out of the house at 7. So I was up, and the phone rang. It was just before 7. They were like almost ready to leave, and the police called and said, we need to come and talk to you. And I tried to get them to tell me just tell me what's wrong. Is he okay? Tell me if he's okay. Tell me, is he in jail? I'll go get him. Just tell me something. Give me an idea. And they wouldn't tell me anything. They just said, you'll have to. I said, it's going to take you an hour to get here. You have to tell me something.
And then the phone rings literally within seconds, and it's Kelly, and she's saying, I can't get a hold of Josh. And I tried phoning him, and I couldn't get a hold of him. And then Kelly said that the police are on their way out and they won't tell me what's going on. And my heart just dropped. And I'm in a hotel room in Vancouver, supposed to be going for business meetings. And
the worst sound ever. He was on the other end of the phone, and all I heard him say was, no.
I don't even know how I got home. I got to the airport, WestJet. I didn't know what else to say other than, I need to get a flight. My son's been murdered. And they just kind of were shocked and looked at me. And then within minutes, I was being whisked through security, and they had a flight. They put me on the front of the plane, just with nobody around me, and just got me home.
Rhonda Lee Rathwell was at work when she got a call from one of Zach's bandmates.
Barry called me, and he said, have you talked to Zach? And I said, no. Why? And he said, because we can't get a hold of him. And I was like, Barry, you need to tell me exactly what you're trying to tell me. Like, tell me what's happening. And he said, we were at that party last night, and Josh is one of the people who was killed. And then from there, it's all just kind of a blur. I kept trying to call Zach's phone. In fact, I phoned the police. I phoned them and said, this is my name, and I was just told that my son was at that party. And then they called me back.
It was hours before Rhonda Lee got that call. Police worked as fast as they could, but they had to be certain of each identity before they could notify each of the 5 victims' families.
They had his driver's license. That's what they showed me when they finally got there. They showed me a picture of his driver's license and said, "Is this your son?" And I said, "Yeah."
Police were quick to track down the killer and find out he's related to one of their own officers. That's coming up on Crime Beat. Police quickly learned the identity of the killer. But what led to this senseless tragedy? We now return to Nancy Hicks with the Brentwood 5 massacre.
The suspect, 22-year-old Matthew DeGrood, is still under watch at the Rocky View Hospital at this hour. He is now charged in the worst mass murder in the city's history. He is officially charged with 5 counts of first-degree murder. DeGrood is the son of a 33-year veteran police officer and identified as the only suspect in the case. 2 days after the mass killing, Inspector Doug DeGrood, with his wife by his side, addressed the media about his son.
Good afternoon, and thank you all for coming. I am Douglas DeGrood, and I am an inspector with the Calgary Police Service, but I'm here today not as a police officer, but as a parent and a husband. I speak for my wife, Susan DeGrood, as we are one voice. We are shocked and devastated, and we are trying to make sense of what happened. We are deeply saddened for what the families and friends of the victims are going through. Your lives have been turned upside down. We know words cannot begin to ease your pain and suffering. Please accept our deepest condolences and know you are in our hearts, our thoughts, and our prayers. Our condolences also go out to the first responders who attended the scene. You had to detach from your emotions to do your job. Your professionalism was exceptional.
Doug DeGrood spoke about his family's struggle to comprehend what had happened, what his son had done. Matthew was a smart young man. He graduated with a Bachelor of Science with distinction. He majored in psychology with a minor in law and society and was just months away from starting law school.
Like any parent can tell you, a love for your child is unconditional. And we love Matthew dearly. We hope someday we will have answers as to why this happened. Regardless, it won't bring the victims back. But we would give anything to do just that.
There was little time for the families of the Brentwood 5 to grieve. The court process was already underway.
We have more now on this story from Brentwood. Our Nancy Hicks is live at the scene. And Nancy, you have some developments.
I've just confirmed that 22-year-old Matthew DeGrood, who is charged with 5 counts of first-degree murder, briefly made an appearance in front of a justice of the peace. He did this via the phone from the Rocky View Hospital. I have been told that he has since been released into the care of the sheriffs. It is my understanding that he will now be taken for a psych evaluation, and that should happen before his next court appearance, which is supposed to happen next week. Then, just days after the Brentwood 5 were killed, DeGrood was sent for a psychiatric assessment.
After a 30-day mental health evaluation, a forensic psychiatrist has determined Matthew DeGrood is fit to stand trial. That means doctors have found the 22-year-old is able to understand the court process and direct his defense counsel. However, court heard DeGrood still has mental health issues and will require further psychiatric care. He's been sent back to the Southern Alberta Forensic Psychiatry Centre for an indeterminate amount of time.
You have to keep in mind that being fit to stand trial only means that he understands the process and he can instruct counsel. You can still be very profoundly mentally ill and be fit to stand trial.
Details of the police investigation and psychiatric assessments were protected by a publication ban until the trial got underway in May of 2016. The issue was not if DeGrood killed the 5 young people, but rather his mental state at the time.
It was a heart-wrenching start to the trial as horrific details were entered in court about what happened that fateful night, and a warning the details are very disturbing. Global's Nancy Hicks has just returned from court. Nancy.
Court heard Matthew DeGrood had been acting strangely in the days and weeks leading up to April 15th, 2014. DeGrood had been making strange posts on social media. He'd been texting things about the Illuminati, Satan, and Hitler to his parents.
On April 14th, 2014, DeGrood updated his Facebook status to read, "Dread and the Fugitive Mind, the world needs a hero. Names of songs by a heavy metal band." An examination of his internet searches revealed he was Googling the World Wars, Hitler, and the Antichrist. In the afternoon of April 14th, DeGrood went to work at a local grocery store. That evening, he sent a series of seemingly random and bizarre messages to his parents, including Book of Revelations and Illuminati. DeGrood left work early and took transit to the community of Brentwood. He walked to a gas station where he met up with a childhood friend named Brendan. Brendan walked with DeGrood to a house party he and his roommates were hosting at the Butler Mansion. At one point, DeGrood handed Brendan a clove of garlic and told him he was going to need it for later. He also gave him a long knife. DeGrood talked about vampires and told people to kill a vampire, you have to stab it in the heart. He also said that at midnight, it would be the end of days. He put on a pair of blue medical latex gloves and said they were to hide his fingerprints in case he had to kill somebody at the end of the world. In the meantime, his parents were growing more concerned. They were texting and trying to find out where he was. He sent his mom a series of messages that included, "I'm okay, Mom, I promise. I will never die, and no one will die. You can't come here, you will die." His mom contacted police, and his dad went out looking for him. They had no idea he was at a party.
How did one person manage to kill 5 people in less than a minute? The shocking details of this case coming up after the break. With the trial for Matthew DeGrood bring the justice the families of the Brentwood 5 were seeking, we now return to Nancy Hicks with the Brentwood 5 Massacre.
At 1:15 a.m., Doug DeGrood approached a patrol car to tell officers he was looking for his son. It was only minutes later those same officers learned of a massive crime in progress. Back at the house, a group of friends had gone to a nearby McDonald's to pick up food. Zach was in the kitchen talking to DeGrood when it all unfolded, quickly and unexpectedly.
I don't think it was minutes at all. I think it would be in seconds. And I think that the offender was having a conversation with one of the victims. Something that happened during the course of that conversation triggered the offender to believe that, this was the start of it. This was it. This was the end of the world. This was, whatever it was that was happening in his head. And it was very, very quick sequence and order in which those 5 kids were killed.
DeGrood took a large chef's knife and stabbed Zach 7 times. There was no warning, no fight, no altercation. He then went into the living room and stabbed Josh 6 times. And then he stabbed Jordan once. Katie tried to escape, but couldn't. She was stabbed 4 times. Lawrence was asleep in the living room when he was stabbed 4 times. In the meantime, despite suffering life-threatening injuries, Josh got up and ran out the front door of the house. He later collapsed on the lawn. Matthew followed him.
The kids who, had just come back with the fast food walked into the house and were just shocked with what they saw. There were just massive amounts of blood. And then on the front lawn there were kind of evidence of the paramedics trying to save the victims and stuff like that.
Zach, Jordan, and Lawrence were already gone. Josh was rushed to hospital, but passed away about a half hour later. Katie was also taken to hospital, but also passed away shortly after. DeGrood was arrested with the help of the canine unit. An injured and handcuffed DeGrood was wheeled into an ambulance on a stretcher. Inside his pocket, police found a latex glove. He had a clove of garlic in his sock. He told the officer it was to keep the vampires away, and he wanted to speak with a lawyer. He was put into an ambulance and told EMS, "I was just trying to kill them before they killed me."
So when he was arrested, the officers on scene, the uniformed officers, noted very quickly that he was speaking and not making a lot of sense, talking about, things that just wouldn't seem normal. So they brought him to the hospital to address, those needs. And I sent a homicide detective to the hospital to ensure that he was, properly arrested and his, charter rights in Canada had been properly exercised. And during the course of that interview as well, that officer noted that, he was talking nonsensical things about, Darth Vader and, various things like that.
While in the ambulance, he told police, "I believe I am Jesus reincarnated, and what I did may seem atrocious, but I was killing Medusas and werewolves." When he arrived at the hospital, he said, "I didn't enjoy killing at all. I said sorry, but the Son of God was controlling me. And when I stabbed them, I tried to do it mercifully. I aimed for their heart. They put up a struggle, which made it hard. But just so you know, it wasn't sadistic or anything."
Nancy, 3 independent experts all agree on DeGrood's mental state at the time of the crimes.
That's right. 2 expert psychiatrists and 1 expert psychologist all agree with the defense that Matthew DeGrood was not criminally responsible at the times the killing happened.
Determining what was real or what could have been faked was a major part of the police investigation in this case.
I believe many members of the public feel that the defense is not criminally responsible is a sham or a scam that people use to escape criminal liability. And as you heard from the expert witnesses that were called, these things are live in the minds of the experts when they do these assessments.
The judge ruled at the time of the fatal stabbings, DeGrood was mentally ill and wasn't able to understand his actions were morally wrong. Matthew DeGrood was found not criminally responsible, or NCR, for 5 counts of first-degree murder. In a letter read in court by his lawyer, DeGrood acknowledged the immense suffering he's caused. He said, "I want to make amends for this. I'm not asking for your forgiveness, but I hope you are able to understand that I am truly sorry for what I've done, and I will work to regain the trust of society." The finding of NCR meant DeGrood would not go to prison. Instead, he was sent to a secure psychiatric facility. The justice emphasized the law around an NCR ruling that ensures people who have mental disorders are treated, not punished.
Our life sentence is to every year go to the mental health review board and try to make sure that this dangerous offender never gets out and has a chance to hurt anyone else.
At the end of the trial, Matthew DeGrood's case officially moved from the justice system into the healthcare system. He was sent to a secure facility, but for how long? Would there come a day when he would once again be free? That's the question the families of the 5 victims wanted an answer to. And that's what we will look at next time on Crime Beat, in the conclusion of the Brentwood 5 massacre. I'm Anthony Robart. Thank you for joining us tonight
high-profile Canadian cases, check out Crime Beat Podcast. You can listen for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or on CuriousCast.ca.
Good evening, I'm Anthony Robart. This is Crime Beat, the stories behind some of Canada's most high-profile homicides, told by the reporters who walk the beat every day, and the families demanding answers. Tonight, 5 people were stabbed in the biggest mass killing in Calgary's history. The young man who did it was found not criminally responsible, and could he one day be free?
He is on an accelerated path to absolute discharge. He is no longer supervised by anyone.
Why would you take the risk of all of society for this?
Some people seem to think that deep down he's just a psychotic killer and he's welcoming the opportunity to revert to that status. And that's ridiculous.
There's one woman who understands the anguish of this path like few others can. The mother of the man who was beheaded on a Greyhound bus.
I don't think I'll ever come to terms with the fact that he is allowed to walk free with no criminal record. Their incurable illness is too delicate.
Here's Nancy Hixt with the conclusion of the Brentwood 5 massacre.
Lawrence Hong, Katie Paris, Jordan Segura, Josh Hunter, and Zachariah Rathwell were all young, talented, and had promising futures. What started out as a party to mark the end of classes at the University of Calgary ended with 5 young people's lives being stolen in a sudden, unprovoked stabbing spree. Because they were killed at a house party in the Calgary neighborhood of Brentwood, they became affectionately known as the Brentwood 5. It was a tragedy that left a scar on the soul of the city. In the course of 3 days, 5 funerals were held. The entire city grieved along with their families. Two weeks after they were killed, a public memorial was held at the University of Calgary. Each family shared special memories of their loved ones. That day, Lawrence would have turned 28. His brother Miles spoke on behalf of the Hong family.
So the last time I spoke to my brother, he comforted me on my birthday by talking about the future. Today, on his birthday, I can't comfort him. He has left a mark. He will not be forgotten. Happy birthday, Lawrence. We'll miss you. Thank you.
Kitty and I shared a very special bond, as most sisters do. She was my person, and I was hers. We may have lost our sister, but we know that whenever we follow our own spirits and we live our passions,
that she'll be right there with us. Standing here in front of all of you takes a lot of courage, but I can hear Jordan say, "You can do it, Mom."
The band is over now because we lost half of our family, and I cannot express how much that hurts. So for my family's sake, the family that consisted of Joshua Hunter, Zachariah Rathwell, Barry Mason, and myself, just keep on dancing and keep on carrying on. Much love.
I'm so sad that they're all gone now, but I'm so happy and so grateful and so thankful that we have them in our lives at all. It was only 21 years, but thank you, Zach. Thank you. I love you.
The man who took these 5 lives was Matthew DeGrood. He was originally charged with 5 counts of first-degree murder. His mental state at the time of the fatal stabbings became the focal point of the trial.
More courtroom debate about whether Matthew DeGrood was faking mental illness in the horrific Brentwood killings. A third expert testified today about DeGrood's state of mind. Nancy Hicks reports on his findings.
Experts say Matthew DeGrood suffered from a disease of the mind when he stabbed and killed 5 young people at a house party 2 years ago. The 24-year-old admits he killed Lawrence Hong, Josh Hunter, Katie Paris, Zachariah Rathwell, and Jordan Segura. But 3 independent psych assessments have deemed DeGrood lacked the ability to know that his actions were morally wrong. DeGrood believed that the world was going to end, that those around him were the Illuminati, and that he had to kill to escape the situation. Doctors spent extensive time checking if DeGrood was faking his symptoms, but in the end, experts say he was in a psychosis suffering from schizophrenia. At the end of the trial, a judge found Matthew DeGrood not criminally responsible, or NCR, for the killings. Diagnosed with schizophrenia, DeGrood began taking medication and was sent to a secure psychiatric facility. He's continually assessed by doctors who report his status to the Alberta Review Board, or the ARB. That review board looks at his case on a yearly basis and decides if there's still a significant threat to the safety of the public. To determine that risk, the board looks at the likelihood of DeGrood becoming psychotic again, and what he would likely do if he did.
Every year after the review board, I probably spend a couple months just trying to climb back out of that darkness. And it doesn't get easier because each time he's that much closer to being out.
The families of the Brentwood 5 relive the trauma over and over again as they present victim impact statements at each ARB hearing.
It takes us right back to the day we found out she died, thinking about her autopsy report, seeing her in a casket, frozen solid, lifeless. Like, every one of those images goes through your head for the next 6 months on either side. And then we got to start all over again next year.
The way the system is set up, they never get a chance to heal.
It's something I've had to experience as time goes. Nobody has sat us down and said, this is how you do this. We figured things out as we go along.
It would be nice not to have to think about it.
Yeah.
But every year, and you get going up to this April 15th, and when they died, and then in September now we're doing the reviews, and it's just a constant, and it would be nice to try and heal somehow.
There's no healing in this for all of us. It's just it's a continuous loop, and there's no healing in the review board process. There's no support in the system for the families.
The very first hearing to review DeGrood's status was held in July of 2016, less than 2 months after the trial.
Once a year we go and do this. We don't have to, but we have to. I think the board would be much, much happier if we didn't. The review board is not about the index offense. It is not about the people that are left. It is about the patient. It is about his well-being, his progress, his support.
We just couldn't get out of that grief. It's a difficult situation that I never encountered, and I hope that nobody, no other parents, should ever go through what we went through. It should never have happened. No parents deserve that. Nobody deserves this. But here we are.
To date, including the trial, the families have presented victim impact statements 5 times, with another hearing scheduled for September of 2020.
Coming up on Crime Beat. From the moment DeGrood was found not criminally responsible, the 5 families expressed concerns about his future. They've seen other killers found NCR walk free. That's coming up after the break. The families of the Brentwood Five are concerned about the risk to public safety if Matthew DeGrood would one day be given absolute freedom. We now return to Nancy Hixt.
Each time DeGrood's case is looked at by the Alberta Review Board, the families of the Brentwood Five fear he'll be granted an absolute discharge, free to go about his life. It's not up to DeGrood to prove he isn't a risk. Rather, it's up to the board to find evidence that he is a risk. The law in Canada states the board has to impose the least onerous restrictions while protecting the safety of the public. Just 10 months after he was declared not criminally responsible, DeGrood began asking for increased freedoms.
Well, as you can imagine, this has been an extremely emotional and draining process for the families of the 5 young people that were killed by Matthew DeGrood. 20 tear-filled victim impact statements were read during the hearing today. Many of these people were pleading with the board to keep DeGrood in a secure facility.
We, the 5 families, vehemently disagree with the treatment team's request for additional privileges outside of the secure hospital facility where there are no fences or security measures.
The following year, in 2018, 2 years after being declared NCR, DeGrood was moved to a secure facility in Edmonton. Doctors described DeGrood as a model patient, and at that time, he was granted unsupervised ground privileges, as well as passes into the city as long as he was supervised by a responsible adult. Both of his parents had been granted that status. He was also allowed to leave for 24 hours at a time to stay with his family. By 2019, his freedoms were again increased exponentially.
The families of the 5 young people killed by Matthew DeGrood are calling for an immediate review of the decision to grant him more freedom. DeGrood was found not criminally responsible, and tonight there are renewed calls for greater accountability in these types of cases. Global's Nancy Hixt is working on this story and joins us now with more. Nancy.
There are 3 options for people deemed not criminally responsible. They can be sent to a secure facility for treatment, they can be granted a conditional discharge, or an absolute discharge.
The ultimate goal of the entire NCR process is to rehabilitate, reintegrate, and let them go on their way. Absolute discharge with no checking in. He is on a path, an accelerated path to absolute discharge, where people need to understand he is no longer supervised by anyone. He does not have to go to a psychiatrist and check in. He does not have to have his drugs, tested to see how much drugs he has in his system, to see he's taking his drugs. He's completely free to go.
In 2019, there was evidence of mental deterioration when a change was made to DeGrood's medication. His symptoms were insomnia and increased activity. Doctors said there was under-recognition and under-reporting by DeGrood of his developing symptoms. What this means is doctors feel when DeGrood's medication is working, he has a good understanding of his mental health and the need for treatment. When his medication is not working, his perception deteriorates along with his condition.
They're not better. They're medicated. They're never going to be better. He's schizophrenic. There's no cure. He's medicated. He's not better.
While he still lives in the secure facility in Edmonton, he's allowed unsupervised visits into the city, overnight passes that extend to a week, and he can travel anywhere in the province for up to a week with a responsible adult. The doctors who treat and assess DeGrood testify at each of the hearings and have made it clear schizophrenia cannot be cured. It can be managed. According to the most recent decision, if DeGrood stops taking his medication, he's likely to relapse within weeks or months, and the relapse is likely to become full-blown. Doctors also testified that the violence could once again be catastrophic if he does re-enter a psychotic state. All of these things raise more questions for the 5 families. How can anyone be sure he'll take his medication and if those meds are even working, unless he's in a secure facility or continually monitored in the community?
So you're telling me that the drugs that he's taking are fine and he probably won't reoffend. But if he does, it will be catastrophic. He will kill people. He'll kill everyone in the room. And I just don't understand how anyone is willing to take that chance.
From what I understand, stress is his biggest trigger. So how much stress is it? But how much of that is going to take him so that his meds aren't maybe enough meds because he's been triggered with this stress or that sort of thing? Who wants to? I just don't understand who wants to take that risk. We know our kids paid with their lives, you know, for what he did and his illness.
Absolute discharge would be the ultimate. He doesn't have to report to anybody. Nobody's going to be monitoring him. He would do whatever he wants.
I don't know what else to say to people to convince them that it's their problem too, not just the problem of the 5 families, and this needs to change. Matthew DeGrood cannot be given an absolute discharge.
Change to the criminal code that would prevent somebody that's committed violent crime or murder from ever being absolutely discharged.
Coming up on Crime Beat, a man who killed and beheaded a young man in one of Canada's most high-profile cases walks free. Could that happen in Matthew DeGrood's case? Welcome back to Crime Beat. It was a case that shocked the nation. A young man brutally attacked and beheaded by a stranger on a Greyhound bus. Why the Brentwood 5 families fear their case could end up with the same shocking outcome. Here's Nancy Hicks.
The one person who can relate to the anxiety the families of the Brentwood 5 are experiencing is Carol Dedeli, Timothy McLean's mother.
He was a free spirit. He was wild. He rather undisciplined, but so fun. Like he's just left such a void. He was so bright and energetic and electric.
Timothy was an adventurer at heart.
Timothy was very much a minimalist. He liked to sofa surf. He traveled lightly. Pretty much everything he possessed was in a backpack. He had been working with the carnival. I think this was his 3rd summer going across the provinces.
While traveling on the carnival circuit, Timothy always made time for his mom.
He would call me from just about everywhere that he was staying to ask for a chewy double chocolate cookie recipe. and he would make them wherever he was living. I didn't have a cell phone, or if I did, I had just got one. Now, I mean, I would take a picture of it and send it, but back then, no, I'd have to give it to him over the phone each and every time. But yeah, his friends still call and ask for that recipe. In fact, one did 3 days ago.
In June of 2008, Timothy made sure he was back in Manitoba for his younger brother's graduation. After that, he headed back to work on the carnival circuit.
The last time I saw my son, he was crossing the street from the hotel when we left. 1 minute. It was a warm summer evening, beautiful night. But when we were leaving, he was going the opposite way from ourselves to go to our vehicles. And he was in the middle of the street, no cars coming, and he turned around and he said, "Bye, Mom, I love you. I'm going to be famous one day." And he turned around and went to his car. I had no idea the last day on the world on this earth would make him famous. But it has.
At the end of July that same year, Timothy rode a Greyhound bus across the prairies with the goal of ending up back home in Winnipeg. On July 30th, 2008, Timothy's mom had on the news as she prepped that night's dinner.
I remember us all being so, oh my God, that's so horrible. When I initially heard it, my first response was, what state did that happen in? And then my next response was, oh my God, that happened here. That happened close to here. Then I realized it was less than an hour from where we are. We all said a prayer for the family and the murdered person.
What she saw on the news shocked an entire nation. A man riding on a Greyhound bus west of Winnipeg had repeatedly stabbed and mutilated another passenger. The victim was beheaded.
I remember saying to the senior ladies, well, that my son would have been on that bus, but he came home 2 days earlier or whatever, and turned out I was wrong.
It never crossed Carol's mind that the victim could be her son.
And it was 24 hours after the killing before Timothy was positively identified and we were informed. The reason they said it took so long, they didn't want to make any mistakes with his identity, and it was difficult to make that identification because of the mass destruction of his body. I knew a lot of what had happened to that individual on the bus before I knew it was my child. And when I heard it was my child, it just hit me like nothing could ever hit you like that again. It was so surreal, so unbelievable that it was just not wanting to sink in. I felt like I was standing on a precipice of craziness. That I could have lost my mind right there because I remember it being so horrific that I wanted to laugh. I hit the ground. I landed on my knees and I screamed. I ran out the front door and I screamed no. But I know that at that moment, I felt like I was right on the edge. And I had to yank myself back because it could have gone. It could have gone the other way.
The bus was pulled over and passengers were stretching their legs. Carol's son, Timothy McLean, smiled at a stranger named Vince Lee. Later, Timothy returned to his seat at the back of the bus, put his earbuds in, closed his eyes, and rested his head against the window. The stranger, Vince Lee, took a seat next to Timothy. Shortly after that, and without warning, Lee violently attacked him. Witnesses reported hearing Timothy scream. He jumped up and tried to defend himself, but Lee easily overpowered him, and he had nowhere to go. The first 2 stab wounds were fatal, but the attack continued.
There were over 100 stab wounds to his body. The first 2 were fatal, neck and upper chest. He didn't suffer for a long time, which was good. But the mutilation that occurred following his initial death is what I struggle with.
While the violence against Timothy went on, the driver and other passengers escaped. RCMP and special negotiators were outside of the bus for nearly 5 hours. During that time, Vince Lee kept stabbing and mutilating Timothy. I need to warn you, these details are graphic. Lee removed Timothy's internal organs and then cannibalized him. He took Timothy's severed head, held it in his hand, and taunted onlookers. Lee opened a window on the bus and jumped out, and he was finally arrested. Timothy's ear, nose, and tongue were found in Lee's pocket. He was charged with second-degree murder. Less than a year later, Lee was found not criminally responsible for his actions. Court heard he had a history of mental illness that was documented since at least 2004. Lee suffered from auditory hallucinations and believed he heard the voice of God telling him to kill Timothy. After being declared NCR, he was sent to a mental health facility in Manitoba, and in the years that followed, his freedoms were gradually increased. In 2016, less than 8 years after he killed Timothy McLean, Vince Lee changed his name to Will Baker. That same year, the review board allowed him to live on his own in a Winnipeg apartment, while subject to conditions and nightly monitoring to make sure he took his medication. It was only a few months later, in February 2017, less than 9 years after the brutal Greyhound slaying, Vince Lee, aka Will Baker, was granted an absolute discharge. That ruling gave him complete freedom.
I don't think I'll ever come to terms with the fact that he is allowed to walk free with no criminal record. Their incurable illness is too delicate. They have to constantly monitor medications and change them up. And in order to find that right combination to control their illness, I don't think individuals like Vince Lee that are so extreme are capable of doing that for themselves. I think they need to be in an environment that is aimed and catered to providing them the care that they need. That's the most humane thing I can think of to do with a mentally ill killer that has proven themselves to be this violent, this unpredictable. If there is no legal mechanism in place that requires them to treat their illness, I don't think that they should be reintegrated back into society. And currently, there is no legal mechanism requiring them to treat their illness.
According to a 1999 ruling by the Supreme Court of Canada, R versus Winco, a review board must order an absolute discharge if a person doesn't pose a significant threat to public safety. And in Lee, or Baker's case, the board ruled he no longer posed a threat.
How many more innocent people are going to die at the hands of a not criminally responsible killer who then is freed with no criminal record to do it again?
My name is Carol Didelli, and I am Timothy McLean's mother.
Timothy's mother has since fought to change legislation. She believes absolute discharges should be taken off the table for killers deemed to be not criminally responsible. But so far, that change hasn't happened.
I don't want to hear talk anymore. I've met all the politicians. I took this to the Senate of Canada. I presented to the House of Commons and to the Senate committee. It's not that they're not aware. I know that they're aware because I told them myself. Now it's up to everybody else to use their voice.
In light of what happened in that case, the families of the Brentwood Five worry Matthew DeGrood will also be granted an absolute discharge.
Coming up on Crime Beat, Matthew DeGrood promises he'll always take his medication and says he could be trusted if granted an absolute discharge. We'll hear from his lawyer after the break. Matthew DeGrood has been described as a model patient, and his freedoms are increasing. But is there a guarantee he would always take his medication? And what are the risks if he doesn't? We now return to Nancy Hicks with the Brentwood 5 Massacre.
The Alberta Review Board has expressed concern that if Matthew DeGrood goes off his medication, his insight would decrease and create a real risk that he could continue to deteriorate to a point where medications are avoided. But his defense lawyer, Alan Fay, maintains that won't be an issue.
The bottom line is this: at this point, as a result of his medication, Matthew DeGrood is rational. He is well. He recognizes that if he does not take his medication, he will become unwell again. And in an unwell state, he could hurt someone. That is the last thing that Matthew DeGrood wants. That is the last place that Matthew DeGrood wants to go. Matthew DeGrood is dedicated to doing everything in his power to remaining well. And if that means taking medication for the rest of his life, he has made it clear he's prepared to do that. And he doesn't need a conditional discharge to ensure he does that. I mean, again, there seems to be this illusion that he's just looking for the opportunity to go off his medication. He's not.
DeGrood maintains he'll always take his medication.
Let's be clear. My client has been completely medication compliant from the get-go. He wants to take his medication. He wants to remain well. He does not want to ever go back to where he was. And I think the problem here is some people seem to think that deep down he's just a psychotic killer, and he's welcoming the opportunity to revert to that status. And that's ridiculous.
I think, the families have expressed concern that if he would be someone who wants to be compliant and always take his medication, then why not consent to a conditional discharge where you would be mandated, you would have to check in, and there would be checks and balances to make sure you would take your medication? Why not consent to that?
Well, first and foremost, it's not a question of him consenting. It's what the Alberta Review Board directs.
But could he not proactively say, I'm not asking for an absolute discharge. Take it off the table. Let me sign this paper and say that that's what I would do. I guess that's what the families are wondering.
But by law, he's entitled to an absolute discharge. All he wants, all I want for him, are what he's legally entitled to. The same way as the families of the victims want what they are legally entitled to. The law of Canada sets out the procedure. It sets out what should happen.
As it stands now, under current Canadian law, if the board deems Matthew DeGrood no longer poses a risk to the public, he must be granted a conditional or an absolute discharge.
So, if this person is doing really well and following their treatment, then how would I find that this person poses a significant risk at this point in time? And so, again, in Winkville, the court says you can't just speculate about down the road at some point in the future if he was to stop taking his medication. That's not a sufficient basis for restricting his liberty at this time.
So we will start with Mr. Bailey.
Forensic psychologist Dr. Patrick Bailey testified before parliamentary justice committees to look at amendments to the criminal code. Nationally, there are approximately 400 NCR cases every year. Less than 10% of those involve serious personal violence or homicide. Dr. Bailey says most of those cases eventually result in absolute discharges. The problem is, if the board grants an absolute discharge to someone found to be NCR for a serious violent offense, and then that person goes off their medication, the risk to the public can be extreme.
We certainly know countless cases of individuals who stop taking their medication because they believe that they're now well. or they don't like the side effects of the medication, and so they opt to stop taking it because some of the side effects can accumulate over time. Or we know, unfortunately, that some of the medications stop being effective. And so unless you have that ongoing monitoring, even if this person is willing to take the medication, it might not be working for them anymore. So why not continue to have some measure of monitoring for these relatively rare personal injury cases?
The issue, once again, comes back to Canadian legislation.
So my suggestion has been that the notion of absolute discharge could be taken off the table for those relatively rare, serious personal injury offenses. So let me be clear, there are some people in the mental health community who don't appreciate me having advanced the idea because they see it as restricting the liberty of somebody who's otherwise earned an absolute discharge. I understand that. I also understand what I consider to be very reasonable public concern about individuals who've committed serious violent offenses being in a position where they obtain an absolute discharge and they're no longer under any supervision. I don't think that the supervision is onerous to say you will continue to see your psychiatrist, you'll continue to take medications as directed, and once a year you're going to come back before the review board for us to decide how you're doing.
It all might sound like a simple enough fix, but so far the Canadian government has not taken action. Timothy McLean's mom wanted those changes to happen before the man who killed her son was released without any conditions. That didn't happen. Now, the families of the Brentwood Five want federal politicians to take action before DeGroote is granted an absolute discharge, because that is the path he's currently on.
So he could be your neighbor, he could change his name like Vince Lee did. And so that should be scary to everybody out there, that he's on a path to be completely unsupervised. So this is why we're speaking now, because they're starting exactly what Vince Lee did at year 6. In year 3 for DeGroote. DeGroote's there at year 3. By the end of this year, he's going to be living in a supervised halfway house. But you see the progression. That's what everyone should be afraid of.
We just really wishes that nothing will happen to other people. Nobody deserves to go through the grief that we're going through.
Clearly, he's ill and violent when he's not on his medication. I don't know. For me personally, it's just what are you willing to risk as a society? And that means laws need to be changed. This could happen to anybody's children. Anybody's. It could happen to anybody's loved ones. It could happen at Walmart when they're shopping or at Tim Hortons in the lineup. As long as they give Matthew DeGroote freedom, everybody is at risk, wherever they go. Why would you take the risk of all of society for this one person?
Coming up on Crime Beat, the families vow to keep fighting until the laws changed. And at the same time, they are struggling to deal with never-ending, overwhelming grief. There would be no closure for the families of the Brentwood Five. In fact, the stress would only increase over time. But there is one bright spot, a place where their loved ones will always be remembered. We now return to Nancy Hicks with the conclusion of the Brentwood Five massacre.
It's been more than 6 years since the Brentwood Five were killed. Their families try to move forward, but grief will hit them when they least expect it. Lorenzo and Marlene Hong think of Lawrence every time they enjoy a good meal.
Cooking. He has a very good taste bud.
Yes,
and he would remember sauces from other restaurants that he would, whenever there's a new place or a recommended restaurant, he would be there and he will have the memory of all the sauces and flavors. He will come back home and look at our pantry and start testing it.
For Shannon Miller, an overwhelming sense of grief can be brought on any time, any day, in an instant.
But anytime I smell popcorn, that was Katie's go-to food. She really loved popcorn. So when I smell popcorn, that reminds me of her. Driving has changed for me. I probably shouldn't have been driving for a few years afterwards even. But even now, if I see a white car with a young girl with a messy bun in her hair, you know, it's that one split second of, oh, that's Katie. Oh, it's not.
Patty Segura thinks of Jordan every day, but it's on special occasions that it hits her the hardest.
People think that the first year is the hardest year, and that's not accurate with me. First year was a very difficult year, but the Christmases after don't get any better. Jordan's birthday, I do everything I can to honor Jordan. And it just makes me angry. And then by the time his birthday's over, I'm sad and I'm crying because he's not here. I cook his favorite meal, and Julie and Antonella come over and we have what Jordan would have wanted. But it does not get easier.
For the Hunters, it's some of the simplest of times with Josh that they miss the most.
I have a hard time talking about without. Sorry. That's the things that I miss the most is just our home time. And in the mornings I get up and go down, and he was good buddies with our dog, and I'd take the dog out of the mudroom and go into his room, and the dog would hop up in the bed and he'd stretch right out along Josh, and we'd sit there and have a conversation, you know, just what he was up to, what his day was going to be like, and he'd sit there and scratch the dog and just have a chat and start the day and kind of be off. And I miss those times a lot.
Rhonda Lee Rathwell struggles daily with overwhelming grief.
You know, I'd make a grocery list and he'd add what he needed. I put on a coat, a raincoat, and in it was an old grocery list that had my writing and then had the things that he wanted. So the absolute terror and shock that he must have been in when this person turned on him and started stabbing him, I go there, and that stops the grieving process.
The families of the Brentwood Five are creating a special place where they'll be able to honor their kids and find solace. It's called the Quintera Legacy Garden. It will be a peaceful and vibrant outdoor space where visitors can reflect, heal, and remember. The families want to reflect the qualities the Brentwood Five embodied, including hope, possibility, and creativity. It's a place where the spirits of Lawrence, Katie, Jordan, Josh, and Zach can live on, and everyone can see that beyond tragedy and loss, there is light.
Alberta Review Board did her full warrant in a secure psychiatric facility for at least another year. The board ruled DeGroote remains a, quote, significant threat to the safety of the public, and stated he is not entitled to an absolute discharge at this time. Some of the privileges recommended the year before were also revoked. The families of the Brentwood Five are still hoping the federal government will make changes to take the option of an absolute discharge for serious violent offenders off the table.